Everyone, this is Vanessa. We're going to get started here in just a minute. We'll give people a chance to log on and get here. If you're not seeing video, you're probably not hearing this, so hopefully you saw my message in the chat box. I know sometimes when we start the broadcast, you have to refresh your browser to get the video going. It won't kick you out or anything, just hit the refresh button and it'll start it up for you. So that should be all good to go. So anyways, great to be here with all of you. I'm really excited to be here to talk about summertime fundraising and what we can do to kind of make the most of, I guess what I would call sometimes the slower season, although for some of you it's probably not. We can talk about that as well. I would love to hear who's here live with us. So if you're here, feel free to say hello in the chat box. Let us know where you're listening in from. I saw Emily said she's here and she's from a US organization, which is great. Welcome. I know I think we have like roughly 200 people registered today, so I'm really excited to be here with all of you. Michelle, welcome from Arizona. I bet it's nice and warm there. Ken, Emily, let's see, we have Jenna, Ashley, fantastic. Lots of folks listening in. Deneen, sorry. We have Sarah, Emily, welcome. So glad you guys can make it. I'm sure a lot of you probably know I'm based out of Vancouver, Canada. So that's where I currently am today, although I was in California last week visiting my family. I have to say, it's like bizarrely warm here all of a sudden. I feel like we went from having like a really rainy spring to all of a sudden it's like unseasonably summer-like weather. So I feel like I'm kind of dealing with a bit of a weather transition at the moment, but I'm not going to complain because I definitely like the sun and I like this kind of weather. So it's been great. Let's see, we have Cynthia, Isabel, welcome. Let's see, Carly, fellow Canadian, hello. Kathy, nice to see you. Let's see, we have Susan. Oh, maybe my audio is echoing. Thanks for letting me know, Janine. Let me see if I can fix that. Hopefully it's not. I would say if your audio is echoing, maybe just try, let's see, try putting on headphones. That might make a difference. I find sometimes that does. But if it's a problem and it keeps echoing, let me know and I'll try to fix it. Hopefully with my headset, it's not too bad. All right, so I'm so glad all of you are here. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I did one of these broadcasts about 2 weeks ago. We talked about newsletters and kind of a different approach to thinking about nonprofit newsletters. And I had a really good time talking with all of you, answering your questions, and thought I would do that again today. And in fact, I'm going to make this a regular thing. I'm going to do a weekly video series. I think just for the summer, we're going to do one June through the end of August. I'm trying to come up with like a clever, catchy name for it right now, but we're working on that. So as soon as I get that up and going, I think we're going to kick off the season on Tuesday, June 6th. It won't just be me over the summer. I am planning on having a number of guests come on. It'll be sort of like a live talk show where we'll have different people come on. We'll talk about different aspects of fundraising and communications and also nonprofit work more generally, and answer lots of your questions. So I think it should be a really good time. I'm really looking forward to that. And if you have topics or ideas you'd like us to cover in upcoming broadcasts like this, let me know. You can send me an email. My email is vanessa@thestorytellingnonprofit.com, or you can also just send me a message in the chat box as well. I'll go through those a little later. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Vanessa Chase Lakshan. I run the storytellingnonprofit.com, which is a resource website for fundraising and communications professionals. My background is as a nonprofit fundraiser, and in this current place in my career, I'm currently working as a consultant and also a writer, helping organizations figure out how to tell great stories that help them raise more money and awareness. But I know that that's not all there is to fundraising. There's certainly a lot of other aspects to it, a lot of other things we can talk about. And so I'm really excited to use kind of these sessions with all of you to talk about some of those other aspects of the work as well. So what do I want to tell you? So I was going to share just kind of a quick update from my week. So I actually got invited to speak tomorrow night at this fundraising gala for the British Columbia Youth Parliament, which is a group in town run by the government agency for youth in leadership positions. And they asked me to come and talk about being a young person in business and sort of the challenges that I faced and goals that I have for myself and sort of the vision that I have for my company moving forward. And I very rarely get asked to come and talk about my business and my experience as an entrepreneur. So sometimes it's a little jarring to get invited to talk about myself and instead of just talking about storytelling and fundraising. So I last week was working on sort of putting together my notes for this keynote that I'm supposed to give at the gala. And I was going through the same process that I often recommend people do, just when they're trying to sort out sort of the details of their personal stories and how everything works and how kind of to identify the through line, basically, or sort of a theme of it. And I'll show you what that looks like. I posted a picture of this on our Facebook page the other day, but basically it's kind of a big mind map. Hopefully you can see it. There we go. So I do what I call basically mind mapping to identify sort of the facts and the ideas that I want to convey in the story. And they wanted me to talk about my own sort of journey in business. And so I sort of plotted out like what have been sort of the milestones, highlights, like big events for me, all those sort of things. And I was really having a lot of trouble initially because they said they wanted me to talk about challenges that I've come up against. And I thought, well, I don't really have any like major challenges, very fortunately at this point. And I immediately kind of went to that place that I see a lot of people go, which is thinking about these sort of big Hollywood-esque conflicts or challenges in the story. And on the surface of it, it didn't seem like I had any. And so going through this process was really helpful, actually, because I realized that one of the challenges that I often come up against is being able to kind of work through a lot of self-doubt that I have and sort of questioning myself. And sort of the kind of theme that I ended up coming up with for the talk was being able to really focus on this idea of commitment to yourself and to a vision that you have for your life and your career. And it's worked out pretty nicely so far. So I'm excited to deliver it tomorrow, but I thought I'd just share with you all sort of my own process of how I go through that. And one of the reasons I like mind mapping as a strategy for figuring out stories is because I really think that it allows people to make connections in a way that they don't necessarily see if it's not written down on paper. You sort of see how life events, how things that were sort of happening to you are related, or sort of the connection between all of these things. It's a really generative process, and it's another kind of way to approach interviewing someone for a story. So I'm happy to talk about that if folks have other questions, but I do want to get to what we're actually talking about here today, which is summertime and the fundraising plan that we might have for ourselves. So we'll go ahead and dive into that. I do just want to get to a quick couple of questions I see in the chat box just around audio issues. Mark, yeah, there's no audio, so you don't have any audio. So there isn't a number. So there's just the audio through the computer speakers. It's not kind of like a traditional webinar platform. So I'd say if you're having issues with audio, maybe try plugging in headphones, perhaps. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Okay, so it looks like you figured that out. All right, so sorry to hear about that. So hopefully we'll have less tech problems moving forward. This is a newer platform for me, although I'm liking it. I'm hoping it's easy for all of you to use as well. All right, so let's get into today's discussion topic. I know a couple of you have submitted questions ahead of time. So if you have questions as I go, we're definitely going to do some Q&A towards the end. Feel free to post your questions. You'll see below the video, there's a big red button that says ask a question or suggest a topic. So feel free to do that and submit anything that comes to mind, anything you'd like me to talk about. So I wanted to talk about this idea of fundraising in the summertime. I know in Canada, we just had Victoria Day weekend, which is our 3-day long weekend here. In the US, Memorial Day weekend is coming up. So it seems like the unofficial start to summer is kind of happening, although the official start of the season isn't until the end of June. But it's kind of an interesting time, I think, in a lot of fundraising offices, right? Sometimes it's really quiet. We don't really have a whole lot going on. And as we get started, I want to know from you, and maybe you all can answer this in the chat box, what's it like in your nonprofit's office around the summertime? Is it really quiet? Do you have a lot going on? Do you find it's busy, or you kind of steady workflow like it is normally during the year? Oh, great, Mark. I'm glad that fixed it for you. Yeah, I know sometimes the internet browsers are a little challenging. So my question is, what's it like in your office over the summer? Is it quiet? Is your workflow pretty consistent? Do you have some special projects that you're working on? Yes, I see Chris said it's pretty quiet. Amy's is busy in May, but not so much over the summer. Yeah, so Stacey, you said it's quiet because there's no students on campus. I remember that as well. So I worked in higher ed for a couple of years, and I remember campus would be really quiet in the summertime, but we were typically busy in, we're pretty busy anyways, in May and June because we did our annual alumni appeal in June. So, which went out to something insane, I think like close to 80,000 people. So we were doing a major mailing, which often took up a ton of time for us. So yeah, so you see a lot of you say it's kind of quiet, there's stuff happening, but not a whole lot. So I've had similar experiences. When I worked in higher education, we often were pretty busy in the summer just based on our appeals calendar. And that's when we did our annual alumni appeal every year. And so it worked for us to kind of keep that consistent schedule. I worked at another organization though here in town where I remember one particular summer feeling really bored. There was just not a whole lot happening. I was having a heck of a time trying to book donor meetings that summer. It seemed like everyone was out of town. I was just not having any luck getting a hold of anyone. And really just felt like I was just counting down the days until September rolled around and hopefully people were back in town. It was easier to get in touch with them. And generally things kind of had a bit of an uptick leading into year end. So it's an interesting kind of predicament because I think, on one hand, we're often really busy during the year, right? I know many of you are probably super busy in like October, November, December with year end. And sometimes in January too, there's sort of a rollover effect of things that, got left behind that we have to deal with. So it can be kind of nice that we have this like lull in our work time. We kind of want to take advantage of that. It's not so busy. Maybe it's a good time to just catch up on things, just kind of allow ourselves to slow down a bit. I totally understand that. And I get that. And it's definitely a good thing to do to kind of work cyclically in a way. But I also think that the summertime can be a really great opportunity to plan, to work on special projects, and to generally just kind of take advantage of the extra time that you might have. The question is, what do you do with that extra time? So I saw someone earlier in the chat box said that they find the summertime is a good time to do funder research, which I think is a really great example. We oftentimes have these like projects or things that we want to work on, and there's just never really a good time to do them. And sometimes having these kind of breaks in sort of your fundraising plan or your appeals cycle is a really great opportunity to work on some of those. So I wanted just to give you a few tips and a few ideas around how to use the summertime for your fundraising plans, whether that's, getting some appeals out, working on special projects, planning for year end. I'm going to go through a couple of different things that I think might be useful for all of you here as we talk about summertime fundraising. And of course, I really welcome you to share your own experiences in the chat box and let me know what sort of things you're working on or if there's some tips that you're looking for as well. I know we had a few questions that came in, so I'm definitely going to get to those as well. So one place that I think is really good to start is to review your annual goals and make a personal work plan based on those. So you might have a sort of annual goals that are set for your fundraising department, which are certainly a great place to start, or maybe for your organization. You might also have personal goals that are related to maybe your last performance review as well, or sort of performance goals that you and a manager or your ED have set for you for the year. I'd really recommend looking at those again, just to review them. We're kind of at the midpoint in the year, and it's a good idea just to check in and think about, okay, well, like, where are we in relation to some of these goals? And what are some really good projects or tasks that will help move us in the right direction to getting towards these goals? So if that means raising more money, you can think about, well, what can I do to do that now? That might mean researching funders. It might mean thinking about some new acquisition strategies. It might mean planning an extra appeal in the fall, and maybe you need to start doing that now. The point is, it's really useful to sit down and kind of reconnect with those goals, and then from there decide what's the best way to use your time. I'll give you an example of something I worked on a couple summers ago. At the time, I was in an organization that had quite a few fundraisers. I think like we had 20 or so fundraisers on staff. So it wasn't by any means a small fundraising team. But it was a social service group. And that particular summer, I was really busy anyways, working on documentation for our fundraising program. We had no standard operating procedures or process documents at all for anything that we were doing. And even though it wasn't like the most sexy or fun project to be working on, it was something that we really needed because people came and went. We really needed some training materials for when we brought on new interns or for when we brought on new staff members. And over the long run, it was really going to be useful for the organization. So that was one project that I took on that summer that I felt like was really worthwhile. Another one that I remember working on was specifically doing some work for donor stewardship over the summer. I knew that we weren't going to solicit anyone in the summer months because we'd never had particularly high uptake in fundraising campaigns over the summer. But I did know that one of the things that we could do was a lot of good donor outreach. So we could reach out to people, we could thank them, we could update them about programs, all of those things that we could about with donor stewardship. So I spent the summer sort of planning out segments of people I wanted to steward. And my goal was to really focus on people who I knew I wanted to solicit in the fall or closer to year end, and figure out, what were some good touch points that I could have with them in the summer to kind of keep that relationship moving forward. And then I executed on them. And they were pretty simple. They weren't anything like overly fancy. Sometimes it was a handwritten note or a nice postcard wishing them, hope great summer season. I knew some people were on vacation, so I'd say, I hope you had a great summer vacation, things like that. I think I did go on a few visits with donors that summer, but it really wasn't anywhere near the volume that I did in the spring or the fall season. So those are some kind of personal examples from my work. I'd love for you to think about, what are some of your big goals for your fundraising program or in your personal work plan? And how can you sort of set some really solid goals for the 3 months over the summer, June, July, August, that will really help you make some good progress towards some of those things? I guarantee there are some really good things that you can work on that will help really set you up for success moving into the fall. So second thing I want to mention is, and this is maybe a little contradictory to what I just said, but don't assume that donors are not around for meetings, especially if you work in major gifts. So I think the assumption is often that summertime people are difficult to get a hold of. It's hard to book meetings with people, get out there. And so sometimes people just kind of stop doing that kind of outreach. I want to encourage you not to hit the brakes completely on that, especially if you're working in major gifts. There might be people who are around, and in fact, their schedules might be less busy. So certainly think about doing some of that outreach and getting in touch with people, maybe booking some meetings or just making some phone calls. Those are all really good things that you can do to keep the ball moving forward in your fundraising program. So last thing I want to just touch on, and this is probably the biggest topic that I'm sure brought a lot of you here to today's conversation, which is the idea of using the summer months to get ahead on year-end fundraising. So I know what some of you are probably thinking, Vanessa, it's May. Why do I need to think about this now? So I don't blame you if that's where you're at, especially if you're at an organization where your year-end campaign is not that complex. Maybe it's only using 1 or 2 solicitation methods, and it's not like overly difficult for you to execute. I want to talk about it though, because in this era of more complex, intricate fundraising, a lot of organizations are moving to what we call multi-channel fundraising campaigns, which is basically a complicated, jargony way of saying that they're using more than one tactic to ask for money. So that means you maybe are using direct mail and email, or maybe you're using the telephone or street canvassing and direct mail, some combination of different approaches to solicit people during a campaign time like year-end fundraising. The thing I want to say about multi-channel campaigns is that even though some people will say that they're complex, there's a lot of moving parts and pieces, which yes, is true. What really makes it easier for people to execute is when they give themselves a long runway to plan and to start implementing that plan. So you might think that it's too early to think about it now, but there are a lot of intermediary steps leading up to asking for those donations in December. There are things that you want to think about doing to prime people for giving, things like communication and stewardship, for example. You really want to focus on reporting back on last gifts that people made, letting them know how those gifts were used, what you've been doing as an organization, the impact that donors are having, all of those things that we often like to talk to donors about. But we also want to start planting the seeds for what's next. And I typically will start doing this maybe in like October usually, which is a little early. But part of the success in getting people ready to give and A, aware of it, and B, fully understanding what's happening is letting them know what's happening ahead of time. I see this all the time with Giving Tuesday campaigns. The ones that are much more successfully executed are the ones where people sort of leak out information over a several week period leading up to it, where they say, Giving Tuesday is coming up. We've got this really exciting campaign. We've got a matching gift. We're going to raise money for this really awesome program that we have. And they let people know ahead of time about what's to come so that people are prepared to give that day. And I think the same is true with year-end fundraising too. And of course, Giving Tuesday is sort of part of that mix of things. But when we really prepare people for what's about to happen, I think we're more likely to have a better response rate and a more engaged audience. So in order to do that, though, as I said, we have to think about like, what are all those little steps between now and December 31st that are going to help us do that? So that might mean sending out your newsletter. It might mean sending out more email updates. It might mean having a more cohesive social media communication strategy and engaging with people that way a little bit more. Those things are all really important, and you can't just suddenly do them. You really have to sort of put the forethought into deciding what those steps are and then starting to execute them, which is why I really like to encourage people to start thinking about this in June or July. So start scheduling time in your calendar. Maybe in the month of June, it's just an hour or maybe 2 hours to sit down and plan, evaluate what you did last year, think about what worked and what didn't. And if you have more capacity or you're trying to reach a bigger goal this year, what are some new tactics you're going to add on to continue to grow at that goal and continue to build out your fundraising plan and your fundraising campaign for that particular part of the year? So those are all really useful things that you can do when you're thinking about year end. I mean, if I was doing this for myself or a client, I would certainly start one with evaluating my program from last year. So looking at the results that I got, how did things go, what worked and what didn't. As I said, those are all really valuable data points that can help inform your strategy and your plan for this year. And then from there, I really want to look at, I start with what are kind of the important dates on the calendar. So I will often get out a big wall calendar, or, you can even just use your Outlook calendar or whatever calendar system you use, and really just start to put in the important dates. So, the drop date for direct mail, when's it going in the mail? When are you sending out emails? When are you sort of making these big asks during that month? Put those things on the calendar, and then you can really easily create a work back schedule for yourself of, when does production need to happen on direct mail? When do you need to write copy for things? When do you need to search for a story or start to look for graphics for a lot of this stuff? That will really help give you a week by week or sort of more granular plan for being able to execute that. And I think that one of the real benefits of giving yourself a longer runway to make that happen is that you have the time and space to really think about it and engage with the ideas for a while. I know for myself, when I work with planning, if I'm feeling rushed or I'm just sort of throwing something together, it's really half-baked, and it's never as good as when I have a lot of time to really mull it over, keep coming back to it every so often, reading it through and thinking about, okay, well, what else could I do? What's missing? What are some other steps that I maybe haven't added in yet or haven't thought of? And that's really where I'm able to get super specific and really clear in my plans for clients so that they really feel like they have something cohesive that will allow them to achieve this sort of larger fundraising goal that they have. So that's definitely my probably biggest piece of advice for everyone who's starting to think about year-end fundraising is just starting to plan now so that you have time to mull things over, to review your plans, to think about what's missing, and to really have a thoughtful and strategic approach to it. I think that's so important because if you wait until October to start doing these things, or even November, we really miss the opportunity to think about, okay, well, what else could we do to make this a stronger campaign? What could we do to strengthen donor relations between now and then? That's a big question I always ask myself when I'm working on campaigns is, what can we do to improve the donor relationships now so that when we ask, we're in a really good position with them? I think that's such a key question. And I hope that's helpful for some of you as you're thinking about how you can kind of integrate this stuff for your organizations as well. And I would say, even if year-end fundraising is not sort of the biggest project on your plate at the moment, and maybe in the fall, your big project is a fundraising gala or some other kind of appeal, maybe a big back to school appeal in September, you can take the same approach to those things where you start planning now so that you are giving yourself a lot of space and time to really work through these details and figure out what's going to need to get done between now and then. And again, work on these pieces like improving donor relations, selling seats to your event, all of these things that need to happen, right? So those are a couple of tips I have for you as you're thinking about the summer. I'm just going to recap those quickly because I think I may have gone through them pretty fast. Hopefully not. But number one, review your annual goals and then create your own work plan from there. So go back to those bigger picture goals and think about those things first, and then start to kind of plan out what would be the best priorities for you to focus on. The second thing, don't assume that donors are not around in the summer. So if you are in major gifts or you want to do some donor outreach, think about how you can do that. Think about, not just totally hitting the brakes on that initiative, but still getting out and seeing people. And lastly, using the time to plan for year-end fundraising. So starting to craft that plan, thinking about what you need, what sort of resources and tools need to be in place, and what you can do to really strengthen donor relationships leading into one of your larger campaigns for the year. So I hope those tips are helpful. The summertime, I think, is such a great time to be able to give yourself space and opportunity just to think through a lot of these things. I know for myself, the spring and the fall tend to be a more busy, just sort of, everything seems to be going faster, right? There's back to school, the weather's getting nicer, everything's happening all at once. But I find this summertime, things seem to slow down, even here in my business as well. And there's just much more time to think strategically and have the opportunity to really investigate and be curious and plan in a way that's both productive and really helpful in the long run. So I hope that's helpful for all of you. I do want to answer some questions, and I saw a few that came in ahead of time. So I'm going to go ahead and answer those. And if any of you have questions you'd like to submit, feel free to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Nikki's question. So Nikki, you asked, as a current one-woman shop that's usually a three-person shop, what are some tips for getting our board members to more actively support our fundraising efforts? Many of them have more downtime in the summer, and I think this could make a huge difference if we get them to step up at this time of year. I absolutely agree with you. I think that board members are, of course, a huge asset to our fundraising programs, and certainly part of the issue is getting them to step up and getting them to participate in these things. I feel like I have an interesting perspective on this question, partially because I have both been a board chair for a long time and I've been on the other side of being a fundraiser, having worked with boards. And I have to say, I think one of the things that I've seen from being a board chair that I don't think I had perspective on before was that we really need to be specific in giving board members plans. I think that one of the things that I made a mistake of as a board chair was assuming that if I told people we need their help with fundraising, they would know what to do, or they would have real clarity on what it was we needed their help with, when in fact they really don't. It does require a lot more handholding, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean that it's not impossible to get people to participate. So I'd really encourage you to think about what are the most useful things your board could help you with. Maybe that's making thank you phone calls. Maybe that's introducing you to some contacts. Maybe it's going out on meetings with you. Make a list or sort of a menu, so to speak, of maybe like 3 to 5 things that would be really helpful, high value items for your board members to help you with. And present that at the next board meeting and say, this summer, I'd like everyone to help with at least one of these things. And then hold people accountable. At the next meeting, have a check-in where everyone has to report back on what they did, how they helped, what their experience was like, really giving them both that clarity on what those small steps are they can take, and having some degree of public accountability, I should say, on the board, are really helpful to getting people to really be involved. I would say if folks are resistant, or by folks, I mean your board members, are resistant to getting involved in fundraising and they're not sure what to do, they're afraid it's just all about asking for money, use the opportunity as an educational moment. So allow them to see that fundraising is not just about asking, that there's also things like stewardship and communications and relationship building, all these really great things that make up philanthropy. Invite them to see that process and have them get involved in other ways first. So making thank you phone calls is a really easy thing for board members to do. They don't have to ask for money. It's usually a fun activity for them. They often have a really good experience. So I would start with that if they're feeling a little resistant and not really sure where to start with getting involved in fundraising. So yeah, all the best, Nikki. I hope that helps. And let me know if you have follow-up questions if you're listening. Let's see, I'm gonna go to Vicky's question next. So Vicky, you said we have an annual appeal, UW donations, and then tens of thousands of people who have been a part of our marathon. I want to segment the non-donors from the annual donors. What would you say what would you say would be the differences in how to approach the thousands who have never given to our organization before? So that's a good question. And I think this is definitely probably applicable for a lot of you who are thinking about retaining donors from things like crowdfunding initiatives or events that you have, and getting them to kind of become regular donors outside of just this one thing that they've done with your organization before. I want to say one, I think it's a good idea that you're thinking about how to acquire them. I think the trick is always figuring out how to transition that relationship. And I've seen this with a number of organizations where they have a lot of people who are really involved in a run or some sort of fundraising peer-to-peer event, and then they want to kind of acquire them as a donor. So I think one of the basic things to know is that oftentimes people will be involved in that event because they only really care about the event. They might be a runner, they might want to participate in the marathon, and that was sort of their MO for being involved in the first place. So it's really important to help kind of bridge the connection between their involvement there and sort of the impact that they had through fundraising, and helping them see that, of course they can run and make an impact and sort of participate that way, but there are other opportunities for them, and they can sort of do this year round if they wanted to. So I would sort of take the approach of helping them sort of connect those dots and think about, well, it's not just about this run. There's this whole other thing that this run is benefiting and sponsoring or supporting, and making sure that people understand that. I would also say too, one of the important things is after the run is over, have you sufficiently followed up and provided them with some stewardship touch points? Those are really good things to think about, which I think will ultimately, again, make it easier for you to hopefully transition them from non-donors to annual donors at some point. I hope that's helpful, Vicki. Let me know if you have follow-up questions about that. If you're on, you can certainly message me in the chat box. I think it's a really interesting question. It's one of the most challenging things, I think, for a lot of organizations is figuring out this question of acquiring people who are kind of on the periphery of what it is our organization is doing, or kind of peripherally involved in like these outside things, like third-party fundraisers or things like this. But I think if you can sort of help message it and figure out what would make them want to be more involved, or what was it that got them involved in the first place, and connect that to your call to action in your appeal, there can often be a really solid reason for people to continue that commitment. All right. So Christine, you had a question. I'm going to attempt to answer it. I'll see if it's helpful. You said, has anyone had any success in executing a millennial targeted fundraising event over the summer? If so, what are the tricks? Worried about folks being out of town, etc. Yeah, good question. I can't say that I have done a ton of targeted millennial fundraising, at least, maybe I have, but I'm just not aware of it. Usually what I do is more general direct response fundraising. If you're looking for resources on raising money from millennials, Derek Feldman would probably be a good person to seek out. I know he has a blog, he has a book on raising money from millennials, and also runs, I think it's called MCON, the Millennial Conference on Impact and Philanthropy. And I think there's like a research paper that they put out every year on that topic too. He may be a good person to start with because I think he'll have a lot of targeted suggestions around how to fundraise from that specific demographic, and might be able to provide, some case studies and ideas on that. Yeah, so I hope that helps for sure. Debbie, you asked a great question. What's the distinction between stewardship functions and an ask? Yeah, so I think there's a lot of distinctions, and sometimes they're often not as clear in fundraising as they could be. People talk about fundraising programs or their fundraising plans or their development program, what have you, any of those sort of words. And, we talk about fundraising specifically, but really that encapsulates, I think, a whole lot of other aspects that make a fundraising program work well. So things like prospecting, cultivation, acquisition, asking, and of course, stewardship again. So those are all really important pieces that help to kind of make the fundraising program work. If we just did asking all the time, for instance, we wouldn't necessarily be building relationships with people over time, which is why stewardship is an important sort of follow-up piece to that. And stewardship is really all about thanking people for their gifts, letting them know how they were used, what sort of impact they had, And that can be as simple as a thank you letter, or maybe you have some sort of follow-up sequence with people where you send them a donor newsletter or something else that helps them to kind of see that impact over time. Those are all examples of stewardship, and sort of hopefully clarifies the distinction between those two. I think about stewardship as sort of a function of relationship building and also being really helpful for donor retention. Whereas asking is really just about bringing in the money. I think stewardship supports the longevity of your fundraising program and also the sustainability of it, which is equally important. Kristen, yeah, so yeah, Derek Feldman. Let me just see if I can find it and I'll put it in the chat box for you. Give me just a second. Okay, here we go. This is a link to his conference. There we go. Let me just get this in the chat box. So that's a link to his conference, which hopefully will give you links to other things as well. Okay, so Kristen, you asked another question. Yes, so I'll go ahead and answer that. We have alumni who are in their 90s and young ones who are just in and out of college. Any ideas about how to reach the younger alumni who are just starting in their careers to get them used to giving? Yeah, so I think this is a huge issue that a lot of higher ed institutions are kind of grappling with and have been for a long time, which is this question of how do we engage young alumni so that they become donors and lifetime donors at that. A lot of institutions start with philanthropy at the student level to get people introduced to the idea that philanthropy is something that's sort of innately a part of the school's culture, that it's something that people participate in. And I think that sometimes that sort of sets the expectation or the sort of precedent that, you know, it's something that everyone at the school does. And there could be a sort of really good benefit to that, certainly. I would also say, you know, there's schools who do things like days of giving or days where students sort of give thanks to donors. Those are all sort of good ideas where you can start to, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of introduce students to the idea of philanthropy. I know when I was at the University of British Columbia, we would often talk to students about the fact that students, or current students, were some of the largest donors to our institution. And that was through certain student fees that they paid as a part of their tuition, which went into the development office and into kind of the philanthropic budget. And that was something that a lot of students didn't know. They didn't know that they were already a part of this, that they were already giving back to the university. And that was one way for us to sort of talk to them about it. I think this is also where stories can be really helpful too, especially stories from other young people who are currently giving or who are really involved. I think that provides a really wonderful kind of social proof where they can see other young alumni or young people giving back to the university. They talk about their values, why it's important for them to give, and they can really hopefully connect with some of that messaging in a way that it might not be able to capture through something that your university just writes. So that's something I would think about, both of those things. I mean, the other thing too is just when I worked in higher ed, we would often talk about like just getting people to start giving at any level. So we would try to make really small asks at first in the hopes that we would get people used to giving at really small levels, and incrementally over their lifetime as a donor, we would be able to upgrade those gifts. And typically that was true. Yeah. Oh, okay. Thanks for clarifying that. So you're actually a youth orchestra, and being in our org is a peak experience for most of the participants. It stays with them throughout their whole life. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I know that that's also another kind of approach to alumni giving or sort of constituent giving, which is that people have participated in a program, maybe as a youth or as an adult, and we now want to ask them for a gift if it feels appropriate, which it seems like in this case it would be. So you could absolutely do that. One of the things that I would think about is what are some sort of cornerstone experiences or common things that people experienced when they were participating in your youth orchestra? What are sort of moments that will kind of cultivate nostalgia or that sense of accomplishment or feeling like they were really a part of something exciting at that time in their lives? being able to kind of hearken people back to that through nostalgia is often a very powerful copywriting tool that can really engage people emotionally in a way that will lead to other things in that relationship. Jenna, you asked if this will be accessible to watch later. Yes, it will. We always record these. I generally put them up on the blog on Fridays, and they're also always available here at this URL. So if you bookmark this URL, you'll be able to come back anytime. The video will always be here, as will the chat box as well. So hopefully that helps. All right, I'm going to answer a couple more questions here. So Emily, you said, I have a 1,600 goal I must meet. How to approach both new and old donors to meet the urgent goal? So I'm guessing, is that like a $1,600 goal? Maybe you can clarify that for me. And I will happily answer that question for you. Yeah, I mean, part of the base of a really strong fundraising appeal is certainly urgency. And one of the challenges I often think is figuring out how to convey that sense of urgency. And you really have to be able to answer that question, why do I have to give now as opposed to 5 years from now? I always come back to that because in theory, people could give anytime they want, but you want them to give today. And so it's really important that you be clear on the urgency. So why now? And there's a lot of ways you can create urgency. If you have a matching gift, maybe there's only a certain amount of time that people can give to that matching gift fund. Maybe it's year-end fundraising where you have to give by December 31st to get a tax receipt for this year. It could also be things like, a program is starting soon, so we need to get our ducks in a row to get the program started. It can be seasonal also, right? I used to do some fundraising for a summer camp here in Vancouver, and we would always send out our appeals in April and May. And there was sort of a natural urgency for people to give by the end of May because, they wouldn't give in December because summer camp wasn't happening. But it was really kind of a natural sort of fit for them to see that urgency. It was a really easy thing for us to convey. Yes, you said that's separate from your normal fundraising. It's the cost for a banquet speaker. $400 has been donated, but this larger amount for us seems rather big. I don't want to panic, but plan to meet the goal. With no overly urgency read from the donor. Yeah, so, I would say if that's sort of where you're at with in terms of trying to fundraise with that, I would probably look for 1 or 2 specific donors if you could. If you have major donors you can talk to about funding the speaker that you're bringing in, talk about why the speaker is so great, what sort of value they're going to add to the event, why it's important for people to hear them and hear this message. Those are all sorts of things that I would talk about to really speak to the importance as to why you need that money. Yeah, so I hope that's helpful. I'm going to wrap up here in a few minutes. I do just want to give you all just sort of a couple of last announcements before we wrap up this week. I want to say, if you want to stay in touch with me, probably one of the easiest ways to do that is to join the Storytelling Nonprofits community group over on Facebook. If you go over to Facebook and search for the Storytelling Nonprofit Lounge, you can join us there. It's a closed group, but you're welcome to join. We welcome in everyone. And basically what we do there is we have lots of weekly discussions. I often will post things during the week that I don't post on the blog or an email. I'm always in there answering questions, and we have a lot of accountability and encouragement, which I think is by far the best part of the group. So if you're looking for the group, feel free to come on over and hang out with us there. It's a lot of fun. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are going to be doing these weekly starting June 6th, so feel free to mark your calendar for that. I think we're going to do it at 12 p.m. Pacific again, so the same time. And I also just want to let you know I'm going to be hosting a webinar later in June on fundraising planning and sort of mid-year reflection. It's called the Virtual Fundraising Planning Retreat. So if you'd like to check that out, I'm just going to add a link in the chat box, and you can use the code PLAN to save 50% on registration. You can enter that in at checkout. So it's basically going to be a webinar where we're going to talk about sort of your progress year to date so far, and how you can plan your next steps for the rest of the year to set yourself up for success and meet some of those fundraising goals that you've set. So it's going to be really fun, not like a traditional webinar. It is going to be pretty interactive. I'll be leading people through a lot of activities and a lot of planning reflection to get yourself set up for the rest of the year. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining me this week. I've had a great, great time with you all. I will be back on Tuesday, June 6th for another one of these broadcasts. As I mentioned, if you have topics or people you'd like me to invite on, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email anytime to vanessa@thestorytellingnonprofit.com. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of the week. And if you're in the US, have a great Memorial Day weekend. Take care, everyone.